I'd been up since dawn, chopping vegetables, seasoning the roast, and setting the table just right. Harper had been buzzing around too, excited to have her family over. It wasn't often we hosted, and I wanted to make it special, maybe even show them I wasn't just some quiet graphic designer who lucked into their daughter's life. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary, the kind of scent that wraps you up and makes you hungry before you even sit down. I'd spend hours on it, picturing their smiles, hoping Bruce, my father-in-law, might slap me on the back and say, "Good job, Cole." I don't know why I thought that. Maybe I was naive. The doorbell rang and Harper squeezed my arm, her eyes bright. "They're here," she said, and I felt a little jolt of nerves mixed with pride. They came in loud, Bruce with his booming voice, Elaine with her soft laugh, Trevor cracking some joke about traffic, and Mia trailing behind, quiet as always. I greeted them, shook hands, offered drinks. Everything felt warm, like we were building something good. The table looked perfect, plates stacked, napkins folded, the roast steaming in the center. I pulled out Harper's chair, then went to sit myself. That's when it happened. Bruce reached over, quick as anything, and snatched my plate right out from under me. He slid it to Trevor, who smirked like it was a game they'd played 100 times. "You eat after the real men," Bruce said, his voice low and sharp, like he was stating a fact. My hand froze halfway to the table. I blinked, thinking I'd misheard him. The room kept moving, forks clinked, Elaine asked for the salt, but I just sat there, staring at the empty spot where my plate had been. I looked at Harper. Her lips were tight, her eyes flicking to me then away. "It's tradition," she muttered under her breath, barely loud enough for me to hear. Tradition? My chest tightened. I reached for the plate, instinct, I guess, but her hand brushed mine, a quick shake of her head stopping me cold. Trevor dug in, tearing into the roast I'd spent all day on, grinning like he'd won something. Bruce leaned back, arms crossed, watching me. Elaine didn't look up. Mia kept her eyes on her lap. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in my throat. What do you even say to that? Give me my food back? This is my house? It sounded weak even in my head. So I sat there, hands in my lap, the heat rising in my face. They ate, laughed, talked about Bruce's old hunting trips while I waited. Waited like some kid at the grown-ups table. When they were done, Bruce pushed the half-empty serving dish my way. "Go on, Cole," he said, like he was doing me a favor. I took it, filled a new plate, and ate in silence. The food tasted like ash. Harper wouldn't meet my eyes. I kept replaying it, his voice, that smirk, her whisper. Tradition. Was this how they saw me? Some guy who didn't count? I chewed slowly, every bite fueling something I couldn't name yet. Anger, sure, but more than that. Hurt. Confusion. I'd cooked for them, opened my home, and they'd turned it into this. I glanced at Harper again, hoping for something, a nod, a touch, but she just sipped her wine and smiled at her mom. The dinner dragged on, their voices blurring into noise. I nodded when I had to, laughed when they expected it, but inside, I was somewhere else. By the time they left, with their loud goodbyes and half-hearted thanks, I was already thinking about what came next. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not like that. Not again. The dishes piled up in the sink, and Harper started washing them while I stood there, still feeling the weight of that empty spot at the table. They liked the food, she said, like that fixed everything. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was spinning, picking apart every second of that night. Bruce's words echoed, real men. What did that even mean? I'd worked hard, built a life with Harper, paid for this house, this food. Wasn't that enough? I watched her scrub a pan, her shoulders relaxed, like nothing had happened. Maybe to her, it hadn't. Maybe this was just how it was with them. But it wasn't how it was with me. I dried my hands on a towel, slow and deliberate, and felt something settle in me. Not loud, not yet, just a quiet promise to myself. They'd see. They'd all see. I didn't know how, but I'd make sure of it. The next morning, I woke up with that dinner still sitting heavy in my chest. Harper was already in the kitchen, humming to herself, pouring coffee like it was any other Sunday. I stood in the doorway, watching her, waiting for her to say something about last night. She didn't. She just handed me a mug and smiled, soft and easy, like nothing was wrong. "You okay?" she asked, but it felt more like a check-in than a real question. I nodded, took the coffee, and sat at the table, the same table where Bruce had made his point. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just thinking." She didn't push, didn't ask what about. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe she already did. I sipped the coffee, letting the heat burn my tongue. and decided right then. I wasn't going to let this fade into some awkward memory we'd all pretend didn't happen. They'd push me, and I was going to push back. I waited until Harper stepped out to run errands. The house was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the tick of the clock. I pulled out my laptop and started typing. Invitations. Simple ones, nothing fancy, just a time, a date, our address. Next Saturday, 6 p.m. dinner at our place. I sent one to Bruce and Elaine, one to Trevor and Mia. My fingers hovered over the keys before I hit send, wondering if this was stupid, if I was making too much out of it. But then I remembered Trevor's smirk, Bruce's voice, Harper's whisper, tradition, and I clicked. Done. No going back now. When Harper got home, arms full of grocery bags, I helped her unpack and said, casual as I could, I invited your folks over again next weekend. She froze, a jar of sauce in her hand. What? What? I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the bread I was sliding into the pantry. Just to show we appreciate them. You know, keep things good. She frowned, like she wasn't sure she bought it, but she didn't argue. Okay, she said finally, and went back to putting stuff away. I could tell she was curious, maybe even worried, but she let it drop. That was fine. She'd see soon enough. The week stretched out slow and fast all at once. At work, I sketched logos and layouts, my hands moving on autopilot while my head was somewhere else. I'd catch myself staring at the screen, imagining their faces when they walked in next time. I wasn't just planning a meal, I was planning a moment, something they wouldn't forget. At home, I started prepping. I picked a menu, nothing too fancy but solid. Grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, a pie for dessert. Simple stuff, stuff I could control. I didn't tell Harper the whole plan. She'd probably think I was crazy or tell me to let it go. But I couldn't. Every time I walked past that dining room table, I saw my plate sliding away, heard Bruce's words. Real men. I'd show them what that meant to me. By Friday, I had it all figured out. I'd gone to the store, picked up everything fresh, chicken still cold from the butcher, potatoes heavy in the bag. I spent that night marinating the meat, letting the spices sink in, my hands busy while my mind raced. Harper watched me from the couch, her book open but her eyes on me. You're really into this, she said, half teasing. I grinned, wiping my hands on a towel. Gotta make it good, right? She laughed, and for a second, it felt normal, like we were just a couple getting ready for company. But I knew better. This wasn't about impressing them anymore. It was about taking something back, something they didn't even know they'd taken. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept running it through my head, every step, every word I'd say. I wasn't mad, not exactly. It was deeper than that. It was about respect, about my place in this house, in this family. Saturday morning, I was up early again, cleaning the kitchen, setting the table just like last time. Harper helped, quieter than usual, like she could sense something brewing. You sure about this? She asked once, her voice soft. I nodded, didn't look up from the napkins I was folding. Yeah, it'll be fine. She didn't push, but I caught her watching me a few times, her brow creased. I didn't care. This wasn't about her right now. It was about me, about them. The day ticked by, slow and heavy, until the clock hit 5. 1 hour to go? I checked the chicken in the oven, stirred the potatoes, made sure everything was ready. My hands were steady, but my heart was thumping hard. I didn't know exactly how they'd react, but I knew one thing. They weren't expecting this. Not from me. Not after I'd sat there quiet last time, taking it like it was nothing. I straightened up, looked around the kitchen, my kitchen, and felt a small, tight smile pull at my lips. Let them come. Let them sit down. They'd see what I had in store. The doorbell rang right at 6, sharp and loud, cutting through the hum of the oven. I wiped my hands on a towel, took a deep breath, and glanced at Harper. She was smoothing her hair, giving me that quick, nervous smile she always did when her family showed up. Here we go, she said, and I nodded, feeling the weight of what was coming. I opened the door, and there they were, Bruce with his big grin, Elaine carrying a bottle of wine, Trevor clapping me on the shoulder like we were buddies, Mia trailing behind with her head down. Smells good in here, Cole, Bruce boomed, stepping past me without waiting for an invite. I forced a smile, said, thanks, and let them in. The air felt thick already, like they'd brought last week's tension with them. But this time, I was ready. We sat down quick. Harper had the small talk going, asking about Elaine's garden, laughing at Trevor's dumb story about his truck. I stayed quiet, pouring water, passing the bread, keeping my hands busy. The table was set just like before, plates stacked neat, food steaming in the middle. Bruce was already leaning back, arms crossed, talking about some deer he'd shot years ago. Trevor cut in with a laugh, saying, "Better get my pick before Cole sneaks it all." I felt Harper tense next to me, but I didn't flinch. I just kept my eyes on the chicken, waiting for the right moment. They were settling in, getting comfortable, thinking this was just another night. That's when I moved. I stood up, calm as I could, and picked up the stack of plates. Bruce raised an eyebrow, but he didn't say anything yet. I walked over to Elaine first, slid a plate in front of her, and started spooning mashed potatoes onto it. "Here you go," I said, my voice steady. She blinked up at me, surprised, but murmured a quiet, "Thank you." Next was Mia. She looked at me like she wasn't sure what was happening, but I gave her a small nod, piled her plate with chicken and beans. Then Harper. I served her slow, deliberate, letting the room feel it. She stared at me, her fork hovering over the table, but she didn't stop me. The men were last. I set plates in front of Bruce and Trevor, empty, and stepped back. "You eat after the women," I said, looking right at Bruce. The words hung there, heavy and clear. I sat down, picked up my fork, and took a bite of my own food. "It's tradition," I added, low and calm, echoing Harper's line from last week. The room went dead quiet. Bruce's face turned red, his jaw tight like he was chewing on something sour. Trevor froze, a laugh half stuck in his throat, looking at his empty plate like it was a joke he didn't get. Elaine's eyes darted between me and Bruce, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. Mia just stared at her food, a tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth, like she wanted to smile, but didn't dare. Harper's breath caught, and I felt her shift beside me, but she didn't speak. I kept eating, slow and steady, letting them sit with it. Bruce finally leaned forward, his voice rough. "What the hell is this, Cole?" I swallowed, met his glare. "Just serving dinner," I said. Thought I'd switch it up. Trevor snorted, but it sounded forced. "You trying to be funny?" he asked, pushing his plate an inch away. I shrugged. "Not really. Just doing it my way this time." Bruce slammed a hand on the table, not hard, but enough to make the glasses rattle. "This is my daughter's house, and you think you can pull this crap?" I didn't blink. "It's my house, too," I said, keeping my tone even. "And I cooked, so I decide who eats when." His eyes narrowed, like he was sizing me up, figuring out if I'd back down. I didn't. I took another bite, the chicken tasting better than it had any right to with all that heat on me. Elaine cleared her throat, soft and nervous. "It's fine, Bruce. Let's just eat." She scooped a bit of potatoes onto his plate, trying to smooth it over. He grunted, didn't touch it. Trevor grabbed the serving spoon himself, muttering something under his breath I didn't catch. Mia ate quietly, her hands trembling a little, but she kept going. Harper still hadn't moved. I could feel her eyes on me, sharp and confused, but I didn't look at her. Not yet. The rest of the meal was tense, jagged. Bruce and Trevor ate, but it was like they were mad at the food itself. Big, angry bites, no compliments this time. Elaine kept the chatter going, talking about nothing, her voice too high. Mia stayed silent, but every now and then, I'd catch her glancing my way, quick and fleeting. Harper picked at her plate, her leg bouncing under the table. I kept my cool, finished my food, even went back for seconds. Let them stew. Let them feel what I'd felt. When it was over, Bruce stood up fast, chair scraping loud. "We're leaving," he said, not looking at me. Elaine followed, mumbling goodbyes. Trevor shot me a glare, but Mia hesitated, her hand brushing mine as she passed. "Thanks for dinner," she whispered, so soft I almost missed it. Then they were gone, the door slamming behind them. Harper turned to me, her face a mix of shock and something else I couldn't read. "Cole," she started, but I held up a hand. "Not now," I said, and started clearing the table. I'd said what I needed to. They'd heard it. That was enough, for tonight. The house felt too quiet after they left, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stacked the plates in the sink, the clatter loud against the silence, while Harper stood by the table, arms crossed, staring at the spot where her dad had been. I could feel her eyes shift to me, waiting for me to say something, but I didn't. Not yet. I turned on the faucet, let the water run hot, and started scrubbing, focusing on the grease, the leftover bits of chicken stuck to the edges. Anything to keep my hands busy, to keep that fire in my chest from spilling out too soon. She finally moved, her footsteps soft on the hardwood, and stopped right behind me. "Cole," she said, her voice tight. What was that? I didn't turn around. I kept washing, the sponge squeaking against the plate. You know what it was? I said, simple as that. She didn't let it go. You humiliated my dad. In front of everyone. Her words hit me like a shove, and I set the plate down hard, water splashing onto the counter. I turned to face her, drying my hands on my jeans. Humiliated him? Harper, he took my plate last week and told me I wasn't a real man. In my own house. And you just sat there. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she wasn't sure how to answer. Her eyes flicked away, then back, and I could see the fight building in her. It's how he is, she said, quieter now. It's how they've always been. You didn't have to make a scene. I laughed, short and sharp, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe she'd said it. A scene? I served dinner, Harper. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything. I just gave them a taste of what they gave me. Why's it okay when he does it, but not me? She stepped back, her arms tightening around herself. Because he's my dad, Cole. He's not perfect, but he's family. You didn't have to turn it into some big statement. I felt my jaw clench, the heat rising again. It wasn't about him being your dad. It was about me being your husband. I cooked that food. I set that table. And he acted like I didn't belong here. You didn't even blink. Her face changed then, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or hurt. I couldn't tell. I told you it was tradition, she said, like that explained everything. Tradition, I repeated, slow and heavy. So it's tradition for me to sit there like some nobody while your brother smirks and your dad calls the shots? That's what you're okay with. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, her lips pressed tight, and I could see her wrestling with it, trying to find a way to defend them without losing me. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. I turned back to the sink, grabbed another plate, started scrubbing again. I didn't want to look at her anymore, didn't want to see that torn expression. You could have talked to me, she said finally, her voice softer now, almost pleading. You didn't have to do it like that. I stopped, my hands still in the soapy water, and let out a long breath. I tried talking last week, Harper. After they left. You brushed it off. Said they liked the food, like that fixed it. What was I supposed to do? Keep eating it, literally, until they decided I was worth something? She didn't have an answer for that. I heard her shift, her shoes scuffing the floor, but she didn't come closer. I didn't know it bothered you that much, she said, so quiet I almost missed it. I turned my head just enough to see her out of the corner of my eye. It did, I said. It does. We didn't say much after that. She grabbed a towel, started drying what I'd washed, and we worked side by side, not talking, not touching. The clink of dishes was the only sound, and it felt wrong, like we were strangers pretending everything was fine. When we finished, she hung the towel up and looked at me, her eyes tired. I need some air, she said, and walked out to the porch. I let her go. I stood there in the kitchen, the lights too bright, the air too still, and felt something crack inside me. Not big, not loud, just a small fracture, spreading slow. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew we weren't okay. Not after this. I'd stood up for myself, flipped their stupid game, and it felt good, right, even, but it didn't fix what I'd hoped it would. Harper was caught in the middle, and I could see it pulling her apart. I wanted to go after her, say something to make it better, but I didn't. I just leaned against the counter, staring at the table, replaying it all. Bruce's red face. Trevor's empty plate. Mia's whisper. Harper's silence. It was done, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I cleaned up the rest of the kitchen alone, slow and methodical, wiping down counters, putting leftovers away. The pie sat untouched. I'd forgotten to even bring it out. I cut myself a slice, sat at the table, and ate it in the dark. It was good, sweet and warm, but it didn't fill the hollow spot growing inside me. Harper came back in after a while, her cheeks pink from the cold. She didn't say anything, just went upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close, soft but final. I stayed down there a little longer, finishing the pie, letting the quiet settle over me. Something had shifted tonight, and I didn't know where it was going. But I knew one thing. I wasn't sorry. Not for what I'd done. Not yet. The next day started slow, heavy with the leftovers of last night's mess. Harper was up before me, moving around the kitchen like a ghost, quiet, not looking at me when I came down. I poured coffee, sat at the table, and watched her slice an apple, the knife clicking against the cutting board. We didn't talk. Not about her dad, not about the dinner, not about anything. It was like we'd built a wall overnight, and neither of us knew how to climb it. My phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the silence, and I grabbed it, expecting junk mail or a work thing. It wasn't. It was Mia. A text, short and simple. Can we talk? Alone. My stomach twisted. I glanced at Harper, her back still to me, and typed back, "Sure." "Where?" She replied fast, "Parked by the library." 11. I checked the clock, 9:30. "Yeah," I sent, and shoved the phone in my pocket before Harper could ask. I didn't tell her where I was going. Just said I had an errand and grabbed my keys. She nodded, didn't look up, and I left, the door clicking shut behind me. The drive to the park was quick, but my head was spinning the whole way. Mia wanting to talk? After last night? I didn't know what to expect, but something told me it wasn't small. I got there early, parked by the library, and walked over to the benches near the swings. It was cold, the kind of March day where the wind bites a little, and I zipped my jacket up, hands in my pockets, waiting. She showed up right at 11, her car pulling in slow, like she wasn't sure she should be there. She stepped out, wrapped in a gray coat, her hair pulled back tight. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around before they landed on me. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. She gave a small nod, walked over, and sat on the bench next to me, not too close. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. I nodded, waiting. She stared at her hands, twisting her fingers together, then took a deep breath. I needed to say thank you. For last night." I blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you," I repeated, not sure I'd heard her right. She nodded, still not looking at me. "Yeah, what you did, serving us first. It meant something." Her words hung there, and I didn't know what to say. I'd done it to push back, to make a point, not to mean something to her. But the way she said it, quiet and raw, made me sit up straighter. "Meant what?" I asked, keeping my voice soft so she wouldn't shut down. She swallowed, glanced at me quick, then away. "It's hard to explain. Trevor, he's not like you. He controls everything. What I wear, who I see, what I say. And Bruce, he's always backed him up. Like it's normal. Like I'm supposed to just take it." My chest went tight. I'd seen Trevor's smirks, heard his dumb jabs, but this was different. "Mia," I said, leaning forward a little. "I didn't know." She shook her head fast. "No one does. I'm good at hiding it. But last night, when you did that, when you put us first, it was like you saw it. Like you knew." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her lips together, fighting tears. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I should reach out or stay still. "I didn't know," I said again, honest. "I just wanted them to feel what I felt. That's all." She nodded, a small, shaky smile breaking through. "Well, it worked. For me, anyway. I didn't think anyone else saw how they are. I thought it was just me being crazy." "You're not crazy," I said, firm enough that she looked at me, really looked at me. "You're not alone, either." Her eyes went wide, then soft, and she nodded again, like she was holding on to that. We sat there for a minute, the wind rustling the bare trees, kids laughing somewhere by the swings. "Does Harper know?" I asked, careful. Mia shook her head. "No, I don't think so. She's close to them. She doesn't see it the way you do." That hit me hard, harder than I expected. Harper didn't see it? Or wouldn't? "Yeah," I said, more to myself than her. Mia shifted, pulling her coat tighter. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she said. "But last night, it made me think I could. Maybe." I didn't push her, didn't ask what she meant. I just said, "If you need anything, you tell me, okay?" She nodded, stood up. "Thanks, Cole," she whispered, and walked back to her car, her steps a little steadier. I stayed on the bench after she left, staring at the ground, my head full. Mia's words kept looping. "Trevor controls everything. Bruce backs him up. And Harper? She didn't see it." I thought about last night, the way Mia had eaten quiet but steady, the way she'd brushed my hand with that thank you. I'd lit a spark without even knowing it. But now what? I drove home slow, the weight of it settling in. Harper was on the couch when I walked in, reading, still quiet. "Errand done?" she asked, not looking up. "Yeah," I said, and went to the kitchen, pouring water I didn't drink. Mia's voice stayed with me, her trembling hands, her whispered thanks. I'd wanted to take something back last night, but I'd done more than that. I'd cracked something open, and I didn't know how to close it, or if I even wanted to. The phone rang late that afternoon, the shrill sound cutting through the quiet of the house like a knife. Harper was upstairs, folding laundry or something. I could hear her moving around, the soft thump of drawers opening and closing. I was in the living room, staring at a sketch I'd started for work, but my mind wasn't on it. Mia's words from the park kept circling, mixing with the memory of Bruce's red face, Trevor's glare. I picked up the phone without checking the screen, figuring it was a client or maybe my mom. "Hello," I said, casual, pencil still in my hand. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Bruce's voice hit me like a punch, low and rough. "No hello. No nothing." I sat up straight, the pencil dropping to the table. "Bruce," I said, keeping it neutral, though my pulse kicked up fast. "You didn't waste time. What you pulled last night, that little stunt with the plates, you embarrassed my daughter. You poisoned my family with that crap." His words came fast, sharp, like he'd been stewing on them all day. I could picture him, pacing his big, cluttered garage, fist clenched. I took a breath, kept my voice steady. "I didn't poison anything, Bruce. I served dinner. That's it." He laughed, but it wasn't funny, it was mean, jagged. "Don't play dumb with me, Cole. You think you're some big shot, flipping the table on us? You're weak. Always have been. And now Harper's stuck with you, some guy who can't take a little tradition without crying about it." That stung, deeper than I wanted to admit. Weak. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "If standing up for myself in my own house is weak," I said, slow and clear, "then maybe you should ask why that scares you so much." He went quiet for a second, and I thought maybe I'd hit something, made him think. But then he came back, colder. "You listen to me, boy. Harper won't stay with someone who disrespects her family. You keep this up, you'll lose her. And don't think I won't be there to remind her what a real man looks like." My stomach dropped. Lose her? I glanced up at the ceiling, where I could still hear her moving, oblivious. "Harper's my wife," I said, my voice harder now. "Not your pawn. And if you think threatening me is going to make me back down, you don't know me at all." He snorted. "I know enough. You're a mistake she hasn't fixed yet. Enjoy your little victory, Cole. It won't last." Then the line went dead, just a flat beep in my ear. I set the phone down slow, my hand shaking a little, and stared at it like it might bite me. I sat there, the room too still, Bruce's words sinking in. Weak. Mistake. Lose her. I wanted to shake it off, tell myself he was just mad, lashing out. But it stuck. I thought about Harper, her silence last night, her distance today. Was he right? Was she pulling away because I'd pushed back? I got up, paced the living room, my socks quiet on the carpet. The sketch sat there, half finished, mocking me. I'd felt good last night, strong, like I'd taken something back. But now? Now it felt like I'd started a war I didn't know how to fight. Bruce wasn't just some loudmouth, he was her dad, her family, her whole life before me. And I was just me, Cole, the guy who drew pictures for a living and thought a dinner could fix something. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, drank it fast. My head was spinning, replaying the call, picking it apart. He threatened me, not with fists, but with something worse. Harper. I didn't want to believe she'd listen to him, that she'd walk away over this, but doubt crept in, cold and sharp. We'd argued last night, sure, but it wasn't over, was it? I set the glass down, leaned on the counter, and tried to think. I'd stood up to him because I had to, because sitting there last week, letting him take my plate, had eaten at me. But what if it cost me more than I'd bargained for? What if Harper couldn't see why I'd done it? I heard her come downstairs, her steps light, and I straightened up, wiping my face clean of whatever mess was showing. She walked in, a basket of clothes in her arms, and stopped when she saw me. "You okay?" she asked, her voice careful, like she was testing the water. I nodded, too quick. "Yeah, just work stuff." She didn't buy it. I could tell by the way her eyes narrowed, but she didn't push. "Okay," she said, and moved past me to the laundry room. I watched her go, Bruce's warning ringing in my ears. Lose her. I didn't want to lose her. She was my wife, my home, the one thing I'd always been sure of. But now, with her dad's voice in my head and her silence between us, I wasn't sure of anything. I grabbed my phone, stared at it, thought about calling him back, telling him to stay out of it. But what good would that do? He'd made his move. Now it was mine. I just didn't know what it was yet. The war had started, whether I wanted it or not, and I had to figure out how to keep my place, here, with her, before he convinced her I didn't deserve it. The days after Bruce's call dragged on, slow and heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. Harper and I moved around each other like we were afraid to bump into something fragile. She'd talk about groceries, the weather, some shows she'd watched, but it was surface stuff, nothing deep. I'd answer, keep it light. But every time she looked away, I wondered what she was thinking. Did she hear her dad's voice too? Was she replaying last weekend, picking sides in her head? I didn't ask. I didn't want to hear the answer if it wasn't the one I needed. Work kept me busy, deadlines piling up, sketches to finish, but even there, I couldn't shake it. I'd stare at my screen, pencil tapping, and see Bruce's sneer, hear Harper's silence. It was eating me up, and I didn't know how to stop it. By Wednesday, the tension was thick enough to choke on. We were in the living room after dinner, me on the couch, her in the armchair, a show droning on the TV neither of us cared about. She'd been quieter than usual all day, picking at her food, answering me with one-word grunts. I couldn't take it anymore. I muted the TV, turned to her. "Harper," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What's going on?" She didn't look at me right away. Her hands twisted in her lap, her eyes fixed on the blank screen. "Nothing," she said, too fast. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Come on. You barely said 10 words to me since Sunday. Something's up." She sighed, long and tired, and finally met my eyes. Hers were hard, guarded. "I don't know, Cole. Maybe I'm just tired of this." "This?" I asked, though I knew what she meant. My stomach sank anyway. She waved a hand, vague but sharp. "All of it. You and my dad. The dinners. The fighting. It's too much." I sat back, feeling the words hit me. "Too much?" "Harper," he started it. "You were there." He took my plate, acted like I didn't belong. I just gave it back to him. Her jaw tightened, and she shook her head. "He's not perfect, Cole. I know that. But he's still my dad. You didn't have to escalate it." "Escalate it?" Like I'd started a war over nothing. And what was I supposed to do? I asked, my voice rising despite myself. "Sit there and take it? Let him and Trevor treat me like some guest in my own house." She stood up then, fast, like she couldn't stay still. "You could have talked to me first. You didn't have to turn it into some big showdown. Now he's pissed, Trevor's pissed, and I'm stuck in the middle." I got up too, matching her, the space between us crackling. "You're not in the middle, Harper. You're my wife. I needed you to back me up, not whisper tradition, and let it slide." Her eyes flashed, hurt and angry. "I didn't know it was that big a deal to you. It's how they are stupid, yeah, but it's not about you. You made it about you." I laughed, short and bitter. "Not about me? He said I wasn't a real man, Harper. In front of you, in front of everyone. How's that not about me?" She crossed her arms, her face red now. "You're blowing it up. He's always been like that, gruff, old school. You knew that when we got married. Why is it suddenly a problem?" I stepped closer, not yelling but close to it. "Because it's my home too. Because I'm tired of feeling like I don't count. You didn't even flinch when he did it. You just sat there." She flinched now, her eyes wet, and I hated it, but I couldn't stop. "Do you think I should be treated like I don't belong here?" I asked, quieter, waiting. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked away. That silence, it was louder than anything she could have said. It cut me deep, deeper than Bruce's words ever had. I turned away, ran a hand through my hair, trying to breathe. "Say something," I said, my back to her. "Tell me what you think." She didn't. I heard her shift, her breath shaky, but no words came. I faced her again, and she was just standing there, arms wrapped around herself, eyes on the floor. "Harper," I said, softer now, "do you see me? The guy you married? Or am I just some problem you're stuck with?" Her head snapped up, tears spilling over. "That's not fair," she whispered. "I love you, Cole. But I love them too. And you're making me choose." I shook my head, my chest tight. "I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to see why I did it. To see me." She wiped her face, quick and angry. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, and walked past me, up the stairs. The bedroom door clicked shut, and I was alone again. I sank onto the couch, the TV still muted, the room dark except for its glow. Her words looped in my head. "I'm stuck in the middle." She didn't get it. I wasn't trying to fight her family. I was trying to keep my place in it. But that silence, that look on her face, it made me wonder if she saw me at all. I thought about Bruce's call, his warning. Was this what he meant? Was she slipping away because I wouldn't bend? I didn't know. I sat there a long time, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge, the faint creak of her moving upstairs. We'd hit a breaking point, and I didn't know if we could come back from it. All I knew was I couldn't keep pretending it didn't matter. Not anymore. It was late Thursday night, the kind of quiet that settles in after a long week, when the doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen, nursing a beer, staring at the counter like it had answers. Harper was upstairs again. She'd been avoiding me since our fight, and I hadn't pushed. The sound jolted me, sharp and unexpected. I set the bottle down, walked to the door, and opened it without thinking. Mia stood there, her face streaked with tears, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her coat was half-zipped, her hair a mess, like she'd left in a hurry. "Cole," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know where else to go. My heart sank. I stepped aside, fast. "Come in," I said, glancing past her into the dark, half expecting Trevor's truck to peel up the drive. It didn't. She stumbled inside, trembling, and I shut the door quick. She dropped the bag by the couch and sank into it, her hands covering her face. I stood there, not sure what to do, my mind racing. "Mia, what happened?" I asked, keeping my voice low so Harper wouldn't hear. Not yet. She took a shaky breath, wiped her eyes, and looked up at me. "Trevor found stuff in my purse. Pamphlets. From a divorce lawyer. I've been thinking about it since your dinner. He lost it, Cole. Screamed at me, said I'd never leave him, that he'd make sure of it." Her words hit me hard, and I sat down across from her, leaning forward. "Did he hurt you?" I asked, my stomach twisting. She shook her head, quick. "No, not like that. But he threw things, broke a lamp. I grabbed what I could and ran. I couldn't stay there." I nodded, trying to process it. Mia, quiet, scared Mia, had been planning to leave Trevor, and my dinner had pushed her to it. I felt a mix of pride and guilt, like I'd handed her a match and didn't know the fire would spread this fast. "You're safe here," I said, firm. "He's not getting in." She gave a small, shaky nod, her hands twisting in her lap. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Harper came down, her hair up in a messy bun, her face tired. She stopped short when she saw Mia, her eyes flicking between us. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp with surprise. Mia looked at me, panicked, like she wasn't sure she should speak. I stood up, faced Harper. "Trevor went off on her. She's scared. She needs to stay here tonight." Harper's mouth opened, then closed, her brow creasing. "What do you mean, went off?" she asked, stepping closer. Mia spoke then, her voice small but steady. "He found out I've been talking to a lawyer. About leaving him. He freaked out, Harper. I had to get out." Harper's face changed. Shock, then something softer, like she was seeing Mia for the first time. "Oh," she said, quiet, and sat down next to her, slow, like she didn't want to spook her. "Are you okay?" Mia nodded, tears spilling again. "I think so. I couldn't stay." Harper reached out, hesitant, then put a hand on Mia's arm. I watched them, my chest tight. This was real now, not just my fight anymore. I didn't lie to Harper. "She needs safety," I said. "I'm giving it to her." Harper looked at me, her eyes searching mine, and for a second, I thought she'd argue. But she didn't. She just nodded, once, and turned back to Mia. "You can stay," she said, soft but sure. Then headlights flashed through the window, bright and fast, cutting across the room. My gut clenched. I moved to the curtain, peeked out. Trevor's truck screeched into the drive, Bruce's car right behind it. "They're here," I said, low, turning to Harper and Mia. Mia shrank back, her breath hitching. "No," she whispered, grabbing her bag like she might bolt. Harper stood up, her face pale but set. "They can't just barge in," she said, though her voice shook a little. I nodded, already moving to the door. "They won't," I said, more to myself than them. The doorbell rang, then a fist pounded, loud and angry. "Mia," Trevor's voice boomed through the wood. "Get out here." I opened the door just enough to see them. Trevor red-faced, fists clenched, Bruce behind him, arms crossed, glaring like I'd stolen something. "Get out of my way, Cole," Trevor snapped, stepping forward. I didn't budge. "She's not going with you," I said, calm but hard, blocking the doorway. Bruce pushed up next to him, his eyes cold. "You're meddling in family business, boy. Step aside." I shook my head. "This is my house. She's staying. You don't get to decide." Trevor lunged then, fast, like he'd shove past me, but I held my ground, my shoulder catching his. He stumbled back, cursing. "You think you can keep her from me?" he yelled. I didn't flinch. "She's not your property," I said, staring him down. Bruce grabbed Trevor's arm, pulling him back, but his glare stayed on me. "You're tearing this family apart," he said, low and venomous. "You did that yourself." I shot back, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Harper appeared behind me, her hand on my arm, her breath quick. Trevor, stop, she said, loud enough to cut through the noise. He glared at her, then at me, but he didn't try again. Bruce muttered something to him, and they backed off, slow, like wolves circling. This isn't over, Trevor said, pointing at me, then climbed into his truck. Bruce followed, his car peeling out after. I shut the door, locked it, and turned to Harper and Mia. Mia was crying again, quiet, her hands over her mouth. Harper looked at me, her eyes wide, shaken but something else too. Resolve, maybe. Thank you, Mia whispered, and I nodded, feeling the weight of it all settle in. They'd come for her, and I'd stopped them. But it wasn't over. Not even close. The house felt like it was holding its breath after Trevor and Bruce left. I stood by the door, my hand still on the lock, listening to the growl of their engines fade down the street. My heart was still pounding, my shoulder aching where Trevor had rammed into me, but I didn't move. Not yet. Mia was on the couch, curled up small, her bag clutched tight like a shield. Harper stood next to me, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor. The silence was thick, heavy with what had just happened. I turned to her, kept my voice low. You okay? She nodded, quick and jerky, but her eyes were wet. Yeah, she said, barely a whisper. I didn't push. I looked at Mia instead. You? She lifted her head, wiped her face with her sleeve. I think so, she said, her voice trembling but there. Thank you, Cole. Both of you. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle on me. You're safe here, I said again, meaning it. Harper moved then, slow, like she was waking up, and sat next to Mia, her hand resting light on her shoulder. What were they thinking? She murmured, more to herself than us. I didn't answer right away. I went to the window, peeked out through the curtain, nothing but dark street, the neighbor's porch light flickering. They were gone, but I knew they'd be back. Not tonight, maybe, but soon. I turned back to the room, leaned against the wall. They thought they could drag her out, I said, keeping it simple. They're wrong. Mia shivered, pulled her knees up. Trevor's never been like that before, she said. Mad. Yeah, but not that. Harper frowned, her hand still on Mia's shoulder. He's always been loud, she said, like she was trying to make sense of it. But this? Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang again, sharp and loud. Mia flinched, her eyes wide. I held up a hand, moved fast to the door, and looked through the peephole. Trevor and Bruce again, standing there like they owned the place. Trevor's face was twisted, Bruce's hard as stone. I opened the door a crack, kept my body in the gap. Go home, I said, flat and firm. Trevor stepped forward, his voice loud. Mia, get out here now. We're not doing this. I didn't budge. She's not going anywhere, I said, staring him down. Bruce pushed up beside him, his voice low and cold. You're making a mistake, Cole. This is family. You don't get to play hero. I met his glare, didn't blink. She ran here because she's scared of him. That's on you too, not me. Trevor banged a fist on the doorframe, making it shake. She's my wife. You don't tell me what happens. I felt the heat rise in me, but I kept my voice steady. She's a person, not a thing you own. She said no. That's it. Bruce pointed at me, his finger close to my face. You're tearing this family apart, you little punk. Harper, get out here and control your husband. I heard Harper gasp behind me, soft but sharp. I didn't turn, kept my eyes on them. This is my house, I said. You don't give orders here. Trevor lunged then, fast, his hands reaching for the door. I shoved back, hard, my shoulder slamming it shut as he pushed. He yelled, pounded once, but I locked it quick, the click loud in the quiet. I turned back. Mia was standing now, trembling, her face pale. Harper was beside her, her eyes wide, her breath fast. Cole, she said, her voice shaky. I nodded, kept it calm. They're not getting in. Trevor's voice came through the door, muffled but furious. Mia, you can't hide forever. Then Bruce, colder. Harper, you let this go on. You're done too. I saw Harper flinch, her hands clenching. She looked at me, then at Mia, and something shifted in her face, fear turning to something harder. She stepped forward, right to my side, and faced the door. Trevor, she called, loud and clear, she's not going with you. Leave. The pounding stopped. Silence. Then Trevor's voice, low and mean. You're picking him over us? Harper didn't hesitate. I'm picking what's right, she said, her voice steady now. I looked at her, my chest tight, not with fear, but something else. Pride, maybe. Relief. She didn't waver, didn't look away from the door. Bruce muttered something I couldn't hear, then footsteps, heavy, angry, moved away. Engines roared, tires squealed, and they were gone again. The room fell quiet, stunned. Mia sank back onto the couch, her hands over her mouth, tears spilling. Harper turned to me, her eyes wet but fierce. "I didn't know," she said, soft. "I didn't see it." I nodded, reached out, brushed her arm. "You see it now," I said. She nodded back, slow, and sat next to Mia, pulling her close. Mia leaned into her, sobbing quiet, and I stood there, watching them, feeling the shift. They'd come to take her, to slam the door shut on her choice, but we'd held it open. Harper had stepped up, not just for Mia, but for me, for us. I didn't know what came next, but that moment, her voice cutting through their noise, stayed with me. The house was ours again, at least for tonight, and I felt something settle, something solid, something real. I locked the door one more time, checked the windows, and sat across from them, ready for whatever came when the sun came up. The next few days were a blur, tense and quiet like the calm after a storm you know isn't done yet. Mia stayed with us, sleeping on the couch, her duffel bag tucked by the armrest like she might need to run again. Harper and I didn't talk much about what happened, not the fight at the door, not her standing up to Trevor, not Bruce's threats. We just moved through it, making coffee, cooking meals, keeping Mia close. But I could feel it building, the weight of everything unsaid between us. Trevor didn't come back, and Bruce didn't call, but their absence wasn't peace, it was waiting. I caught Harper staring out the window sometimes, her face tight, like she was bracing for them to roll up again. I didn't blame her. I was too. On Monday, Mia left early, her hands shaky but her jaw set. "I'm going to the courthouse," she said, pulling on her coat. "Filing for divorce." I nodded, handed her a thermos of coffee. "You sure?" I asked, not doubting her, just checking. She gave a small, firm nod. "Yeah, I can't go back." Harper hugged her tight, whispered something I didn't catch, and Mia was gone, her car crunching down the drive. We stood there after, the house too quiet again. Harper looked at me, her eyes tired but clear. "She's brave," she said. I agreed, but I was thinking about Harper too, how she'd stepped up, how she'd found her voice that night. I didn't say it. Not yet. That afternoon, Harper got a call from her mom, Elaine. She took it in the bedroom, the door half open, and I could hear her voice, soft, then sharp, then soft again. When she came out, her face was pale, her hands twisting together. "Mom's staying with a friend," she said, sitting at the kitchen table. I leaned against the counter, waiting. "She left Dad. Said she's done with him controlling everything." Mia leaving Trevor, it pushed her over the edge. My eyebrows went up. "Elaine, quiet Elaine, walking out?" "Wow," I said, simple, not sure what else to fit. Harper nodded, staring at her hands. She said she's been thinking about it for years, just never had the guts. Until now. I sat across from her, the table between us feeling smaller than it had in days. "What about you?" I asked, careful. "How do you feel about it?" She took a breath, slow. "I don't know. Relieved, maybe. Scared. It's all falling apart, Cole." I reached out, hesitated, then put my hand over hers. "Maybe it's not falling apart," I said. "Maybe it's just changing." She looked at me, her eyes searching, and didn't pull away. "Maybe," she said, quiet. We sat like that for a while, the clock ticking, the house settling around us. That night, she suggested therapy, couples therapy. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but small. "Really talk." I nodded, no hesitation. "Yeah. Let's do it." It wasn't a fix, but it was a start, and I'd take it. The first session was rough, awkward, messy, tears on both sides. We unpacked it all, the dinners, her dad, my anger, her silence. She admitted she'd been blind to how bad it was Bruce's control, Trevor's temper. "I thought it was normal," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't see how it hurt you." I told her how small I'd felt, how her not backing me had cut deeper than Bruce's words. "I just wanted you to see me," I said, my throat tight. The therapist listened, nudged us along, and by the end, we weren't healed, but we were talking. Really talking. It wasn't smooth after that. Some nights we argued. Some nights we didn't sleep, but we kept going. Kept showing up. Weeks later, things settled. Slow but sure. Mia got her divorce papers filed, moved into a little apartment across town. Elaine stayed gone, filing her own papers against Bruce. Trevor called Harper once, yelling, but she hung up, her hands shaking but her face set. Bruce didn't reach out, and I didn't care. One night, Harper and I were in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, just us, no guests, no tension. She stopped, a plate in her hands, and looked at me. I see it now, she said, soft but clear. What they did. To you, to Mia, to Mom. I'm sorry I didn't before. I set my towel down, stepped closer. You see it now, I said, echoing myself from that night. That's enough. She took my hand, squeezed it, and I felt something loosen in me, something I'd been holding since that first dinner. A month later, we sat at the table again, just the two of us. I'd cooked, nothing fancy, just pasta and garlic bread, but it was ours. No one to snatch my plate, no one to judge. Harper laughed at some dumb joke I made, her smile real, not forced. I looked at her, at the table, at the empty chairs where her family used to sit, and felt it, my place. Not beneath them, not fighting for it, but mine. Tradition, the kind they'd shoved down my throat, was gone. We were building something new, piece by piece, and it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I took a bite, the food warm and good, and for the first time in a long time, the seat felt like it belonged to me, like I belonged here, with her.